send me something through the chat, and I will ask the question um, for you. Uh, Otherwise, you can feel free to ask it and yourself when she asks for questions. But now I'll let Kristen take over.
Excellent. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me, and I'm really excited to share some skills for managing emotions to stay connected and to communicate effectively for families with teens today. So, this is me. You'll see me at the end as well, but I'm a therapist working in private practice. I do individual, family, and couples therapy. I'm also the founder of Northampton Center for DBT, through which I offer skills training courses for adults, personalized DBT boot camps to families with preteens and teens. I also do intensives with couples and workshops for businesses or schools, other kind of community settings, things like that. And you can find out a lot about me and about DBT in general on my website, which is here. So I've found lots of ways to bring DBT skills to different people. And the reason for that is because I've seen these skills work. I got trained in DBT about 17 years ago now, and I've seen it help more people than any other tool I've tried. So I'm excited to get to share skills here with you this evening. Here are our goals for this evening. I'm going to teach these 4 DBT skills, all of which are going to help us regulate our emotions, take care of our relationships, and know what we need so that we can communicate those needs effectively. I think I'm mostly speaking to parents this evening, but these skills can absolutely be used by teens. And even if teens aren't learning these skills directly, when parents start using skills, dynamics tend to shift and teens get lots of benefits and tend to pick up on the skills as well. Let me begin by giving just a brief overview of what DBT is. So, first of all, DBT stands for Dialectical Behavior Therapy. And I've heard it said that the creator, a woman named Marsha Linehan, said that if she could have called it Zen behavior therapy and gotten insurance companies to pay for it, she would have. But she knew that that wasn't going to fly. So, dialectics is a philosophical perspective with a lot in common with Zen Buddhism, like the importance of mindfulness and acceptance and non judgment. Also, like Zen, DBT discourages all or nothing thinking, um, and helps us to find the middle path between those extremes through the skills. And this is especially helpful for teens since we typically experience a lot of extreme all or nothing thinking during this phase of brain development, which can, of course, negatively impact our emotions and our behavior. So there's 4 separate modules of DBT. There's skills for mindfulness, so being aware of and in control of what our brains are up to. Skills for distress tolerance. These ones are meant to be used when we're at our highest levels of distress, maybe in a crisis. We tend to act impulsively when we're overwhelmed to reduce our distress quickly. And for most of us, the things that we do in those moments might not be the most effective coping mechanisms. Sometimes we even make things worse. So the distress tolerance skills are all focused on effective coping strategies for those instances. Then there's emotion regulation, skills to understand our emotions and be in control of what we do when we experience emotions instead of feeling that our emotions control us. And interpersonal effectiveness, which are skills for taking care of relationships, including knowing what we want and need in relationships, and assertive communication skills to get those wants and needs met without sacrificing the relationship or our own sense of self respect. In adolescent specific DBT, there's also a 5th module, which is all skills focused on finding the middle path, which it means managing that extreme thinking that I mentioned before. So I teach these skills as standalones in therapy sometimes. To go through the whole course takes about 6 to 9 months. Boot camps or intensives are personalized to the family or community that I'm working with. And tonight I've drawn from all these skills to share what I hope are going to be the most helpful in the time that we have together. So, first, I'd like to offer you the DBT perspective on mindfulness. We're probably all familiar with meditation and maybe other forms of mindfulness practices, and the strong research that's been done that shows that these practices can improve our ability to focus, reduce stress, increase happiness. All of these things are true. Mindfulness is also required for connection, emotion regulation, and communication. If we go by the definition I have here, being present in this moment as it is, we can see how it would be hard to connect with another person in a meaningful way if we're not paying attention to the moment that we're really in with them fully, or we're wishing that the moment were different in some way. We also don't have the opportunity to regulate our emotions if we're not aware of how we're feeling and able to take care of those feelings in real time. And communication also rarely goes well if we're distracted. Being present in the moment as it is more than just staying focused, though. If we're focused on the moment as it is, this also means we're not jumping to conclusions about others, we're not making assumptions about the future, we're accepting the moment fully as it truthfully is. We're only in the moment that we're in. So, the skills that you see here are the what and how skills of mindfulness. One thing I love about DBT is how it breaks down kind of seemingly mysterious or complicated things like mindfulness into operationalized and organized steps. So, here we have specifically what am I meant to be doing and how am I meant to be doing it if I'm practicing mindfulness? And these skills are designed to be used anytime, anywhere, and while doing anything. So, not just when we're sitting quietly, maybe focused on our breath, like we might do during a formal meditation practice. So, let's talk about what each of these skills look like. When we observe mindfully, we only observe the facts that we're able to perceive through our senses. And this is not as simple as it might sound because of how our brains are wired. So, let's discuss that for a sec. So it's a function of our brains to fill in any blanks in what we're able to perceive through our senses. And that's really good news because it means we don't have to work so hard to understand what's going on from moment to moment. Our brains have an autopilot for filling in the blanks with assumptions or judgments based on our past experiences, the context, all kinds of things. So that's great most of the time. However, those judgments and assumptions can sometimes lead to big emotions or misunderstandings. If I assume that my teenager left their shoes in the middle of the hallway because they wanted to trip me, which is an example that I'm going to keep coming back to tonight because it's mundane and I hear relatable, I'm going to feel and behave a lot differently than if I assume that they were feeling anxious or they were distracted and they just forgot to put them out of the way. So when we observe mindfully, we're trying to notice just the things that we can observe through our senses so that we can see the difference between the facts coming through our senses and the judgments or assumptions that our brains are creating. And we do this so that we can strengthen this discerning muscle in our brains that decides from one situation to another whether we want to feel and behave according to our assumptions or whether we might want to question those assumptions. And maybe that's going to lead to a more desirable outcome. So it takes intentional practice to observe mindfully, but the payoff is enormous. Next, we describe. To describe mindfully, we simply label the facts that we can perceive through our senses. So if I observe that the shoes were left in the hallway, I can describe simply by labeling the shoes were left in the hallway and I almost tripped and I feel annoyed. All of those are things that I can perceive through my own senses or observe. So I can now describe them. I'm not adding to that this happened because my teenager has no regard for the safety of others, or subtracting from it by not acknowledging my annoyance. I'm observing and describing the full picture. We also want to participate. This means that we're fully in the motion that we're in, the moment that we're in. We're throwing our whole selves into this moment and we're doing exactly what this situation calls for. So if we're relaxing, we're fully participating in relaxing by noticing how our bodies feel and experiencing the pleasure of that moment. If we're negotiating something with a family member, we're bringing our whole self to that experience. We're doing whatever we're doing completely. So that's what we're doing. Now we want to look at how we're meant to be doing all of that. First, non-judgmentally. Judgment is not a bad thing. It's actually a really important brain function that helps us to stay safe. We'd be in trouble if we didn't have a sense of what we like or don't like, what looks disgusting or delicious, etc. So, non judgment doesn't mean we're not supposed to experience the brain function of judgment, but that we want to be able to tell the difference between the facts and a judgment. So, if we're being non judgmental, we're simply noticing when judgments are present and we're not confusing them for facts. Next, we want to do this one mindfully. We're only doing the thing that we're doing. If I'm talking to my kid, I'm only talking to my kid. If I'm patting the cat, I'm only patting the cat. This means I'm not driving and looking at my phone, talking to someone and remembering something about a TV show, almost tripping over shoes and feeling annoyed and imagining what's going to happen next. Doing things one mindfully is a way to increase our happiness as well. Harvard actually did a really interesting study a while back that I can talk about at the end if people are interested, showing that people are really not able to be happy when we're multitasking. And in fact, the human brain isn't even able to multitask. When we think we're multitasking, what we're actually doing is one thing for a split second and another thing for a split second. And we're switching our focus between those two things so fast that we're not able to perceive the shift, but we are able to perceive the effects of feeling scattered and exhausted that often go along with this practice. When we monotask, we experience relief from not forcing our brains to do something unnatural, and we can also get more enjoyment from the moment that we're in, even if it's not during an activity that we typically consider super enjoyable. Try only cutting vegetables and notice how much positive sensory information you receive. Try only feeling irritated with something that just happened instead of feeling irritated and planning what's next and telling yourself a story about how wrong the person who just irritated you is. It's a lot easier to just feel the thing than to add all that extra stuff. And finally, if we're practicing being mindful, we want to do this effectively. This means I'm willing to do exactly what the situation calls for without crankiness or insisting that somebody else should have to do the thing or that I'm not going to engage in the moment that we're in for some reason. So, for example, I want to demand that the shoes not be left where I will trip, but I've tried that and it doesn't work. So, I have to be flexible about finding a different solution, including expecting the shoes to be there so I don't trip, troubleshooting with my teen instead of demanding, etc. I have to be effective in that moment. So, again, these skills can be used anytime, anywhere, while doing anything. You can use them all at once during a formal meditation practice, or you could use just one at a time as you're going about your day. And as with all the skills, DBT encourages us to practice these things regularly and on purpose so that we can create new neural pathways in our brains and eventually find ourselves being more mindful automatically without having to work hard to get there. One of the benefits of being more mindful in general is that we know how we're feeling from moment to moment. So, this thermometer is a measure of subjective units of distress, sometimes called the SUDS scale. When we aren't mindful, we're likely to miss cues that we might be moving into the orange and red zones of this scale. As you can see, green and yellow are pretty manageable, even if not comfortable. But once we get into the red and orange zones, we are not good at making decisions. We're not good at communicating or connecting. In those zones, we're likely impulsive. We want to avoid the discomfort that we're feeling, even if that means doing something that might cause another problem. This has a bit to do with neurology, just how our brains work. As adults, the parts of our brains are wired together and able to communicate. Your adolescent's brain is not like that. The parts are still developing, and the ability for parts to work together is also still developing. For all of us, though, when we're stressed, our prefrontal cortexes, which are responsible for all the good stuff listed here, are offline. In the red zone, we're in limbic activation because when we're really stressed, we're in fight, flight, freeze, freak out, fawn, because those are survival mechanisms. We've adapted those things to keep us safe in moments of real emergency or crisis. As you can see from what's listed here as the limbic system's qualities, we are much less likely to handle a stressful situation effectively without our prefrontal cortex. So when we're practicing staying mindful by using the what and how skills, we're much more likely to notice when we're in a zone of dysregulation and know that we need to get our prefrontal cortexes back online before we can be skillful. As a little PS to this information about how our brains work, it's also helpful to know that in the adolescent brain, sometimes the prefrontal cortex can't be accessed and they're working from the limbic system, not because they're stressed, but just because of the way brain development works. Dr. Dan Siegel, Siegel, I'll talk about him in later. He wrote a great book called Brainstorm that's all about the ways that the teen brain is developing and primed for learning because it's in this phase. So it's not all bad news that this is what our teens' brains are up to. And it can help us to understand the neurological position that they're in at this stage. Okay, let's talk about our next skill. So the tip skills are super helpful for getting our prefrontal cortex back online. A lot of skills, whether from DBT or CBT or other strategies, they require us to think differently, to feel differently. When we're in the orange and red zones, though, we can't think clearly. So these skills are intended to work directly on our nervous system, because if we can shift that, our prefrontal cortex will come back online and we'll be able to think again. So there's two parts of the nervous system. We have a sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic is the accelerator. It's what gets us moving fast to deal with danger. You don't have to think, you don't have to make plans, you just go because of the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is the brake. It gets us into the green zone on the SUD scale. So we want to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system with this skill set. We're working to reduce our heart rates, release hormones for calming the body, increase blood flow to the brain so that we can think clearly and act effectively. So the tip skill, DBT loves an acronym. It's easier to remember an acronym than a bunch of random strategies when your limbic system's in charge. So let's go through each of these. So it stands for temperature, intense exercise, paced breathing, and paired muscle relaxation. Temperature means change your body temperature. Typically, if we're in sympathetic nervous system activation, we're hot, so we want to cool down. There are lots of ways to do this by taking a cool shower, placing an ice pack on your sternum or the back of your neck, running cold water over pulse points like your wrists. These are all great. To get even more out of temperature, though, I would like to introduce you to something called the mammalian dive reflex. This is a reflex that all mammals are programmed with, that's turned on when the area around our eyes gets cold and wet, like if we're diving into water. What happens when we dive into water is that without having to think about it or intentionally control anything, our parasympathetic nervous system switches on fast to conserve oxygen by slowing down the respiratory system, which then slows down the circulatory system and starts a whole domino effect of slowing everything down. So the best way to stimulate this dive reflex is to simulate a dive as closely as possible. So unless you have a cool pool to dive into anytime you need to bring your distress down, the best way to do this is to fill a salad bowl with ice water and put your face in it. I understand that this sounds ridiculous, but I really hope you'll try it. Maybe do some research online if you need evidence, because it works fast to calm us down. The way it works, if you look at the image in the circle here, is that there are cutaneous sensors, so sensors in the top layer of our skin, under and above the eye, as well as through the optical nerve, that know when the area is cold and wet and send the message to the brain that we need to conserve oxygen. So if you don't have a salad bowl of ice water, you could use a damp ice pack or a washcloth or a paper towel in a public restroom if that's what you've got. And if you can, bend over and hold your breath. Again, I know that it sounds silly. I really hope that you'll try it and see for yourself how it works. Notice where you are on the SUD scale before you try it out, and then notice where you are afterwards, and I think you'll be sold. Next, we have intense exercise. With this skill, we are intentionally increasing our heart rate through exercise so that when we stop, the parasympathetic nervous system is going to take over. This means you can get your heart rate up any way that you like to do that. So maybe you already have exercises that you like to do. If not, you could try jumping jacks or going up and down stairs for something quick and simple. If you have more time and the ability, you could go for a hike or jog or do a workout you find on YouTube. I've known people who can't do those types of movements who've just sat in a chair and stomped their feet as hard and fast as they can to get their heart rates up. Whatever works for you is good. Ideally, we want to increase our heart rates for at least 5 minutes to kick on the sympathetic nervous system and to make sure the message gets to the brain that this is happening due to exertion, not danger. And that way, the parasympathetic nervous system takes over really easily to aid in recovery when we stop. So we turn on the sympathetic to force the parasympathetic nervous system on afterwards. We also have paced breathing. There are lots of ways to do this. Any way that you pace your breath to simulate how you would be breathing if you were relaxed, so slowly and deeply, or any really intentionally paced breathing, like Breathe with the Shape, which you can Google. It's a pretty little shape that opens on the inhale, closes on the exhale. You could do squared breathing, which is when you inhale, hold your breath, exhale, and hold your breath for the same like number of counts. You can also take the hold out if you don't like that. Or my personal favorite, the 4-7-8 breath, which is where we inhale for 4, hold our breaths for 7, and exhale for 8. I like this one best because every time we inhale, the sympathetic nervous system turns on. Every time you inhale, your heart rate increases. And every time we exhale, the parasympathetic nervous system turns on. So if you're trying for parasympathetic activation, you get twice as much if you exhale for longer. Any of these strategies send the message to the brain and the nervous system that all is well. It's really hard to panic if we're breathing slowly and deeply and calmly, the same way that it's really hard not to panic if we're breathing shallowly and fast. So the message gets through to the brain and turns on the parasympathetic nervous system by changing these behaviors that typically go along with nervous system changes. Finally, we have the skill of paired muscle relaxation. This is where we intentionally activate our sympathetic nervous system by tensing our muscles. This could be all of your muscles at once, just one muscle group, like just your hands, or you could do it like a body scan where you tense your face on the first breath, your shoulders on the next, then your arms, and so forth. We do that on the inhale, and then we turn on the parasympathetic nervous system by having a nice big exhale and relaxing all of our muscles. And research shows that we get more of those hormones released to our muscles if we relax after tensing than if we just try to relax them without doing the first step. Then we compare the act of exhaling and relaxing with repeating a calming statement in our minds. That could just be relax or all is well, whatever works for you. If we do this for a few minutes regularly, maybe as a mindfulness practice or maybe as we're falling asleep at night, we get the additional benefit of creating a new neural pathway in our brains that turns on the parasympathetic nervous system when we exhale and think relax. So then we would have access to quick activation over time. So those are our tip skills. So now we're using mindfulness to be aware of how we're doing and what parts of our brains are available to us. And then we're using tip skills to make sure our parasympathetic nervous system is on and we're in the green zone. So we're feeling good. We're more able to connect meaningfully as well as see things clearly from this space. So we're doing less jumping to conclusions and anticipating crises and making assumptions that aren't helpful. We're able to discern the difference between what's helpful and what's not. And we can use these mindfulness and tip skills as standalones, or we can combine them. We could use paced breathing or paired muscle relaxation as a mindfulness practice. We could be one mindful and non judgmental during intense exercise. From this space, we're also going to be better communicators. The first skill that I want to offer you for communication, although this is a skill that can be used in a lot of different contexts, is called the STOP skill. It's another acronym, and we want to remember to use this one anytime we feel a strong impulse to act, but our prefrontal cortex is communicating that this action might not be the most effective, or we should proceed with caution because maybe emotions are high, ours or someone else's. Maybe this is a situation that we've gotten in trouble in before, so we want to be thoughtful and effective. The S in this acronym just means stop. Do not do the thing you are feeling an impulse to do. Our emotions have functions, and part of the function of our emotions is to get us to do stuff. So that action urge can be really, really strong. But in this instance, you're going to choose to not act, to freeze. If this were in front of somebody that you're communicating with, you might want to just avoid speaking and keep listening. It's shocking to me how effective that is. I feel like I'm supposed to say something, but if I don't and I just let the other person keep talking, they keep talking. Or if the conversational flow really requires something from you, you could make an excuse. I have to use the restroom. I have to step outside for a moment. Or you could be more direct and admit, I need a moment before I can respond. If this is in a text message or something like that, where a response is not required from you in the moment, but you really, really feel like responding, that's easier. Just don't for right now. You will respond, but first you'll make sure that you're ready by doing these other steps. So, next we take a step back. This means leaving the situation temporarily. If you're in person with your teenager or a friend, or you're at work or school, you could make an excuse again, or you could say something like, it's important to me that I'm clear. So could you give me 5 minutes? I think I'll be able to gather my thoughts in that time. And again, if you have more time, if it's not pressing, no explanation is necessary. You can just put your phone down and take some space from the situation. Taking a step back means not focusing on the problem for a moment. So maybe you distract yourself with something funny or peaceful. Maybe you use a tip skill to make sure you're regulated before moving on. But you're doing something to try to regulate and kind of shake free of any assumptions or judgments that might have popped up, as well as any impulsive reactions that we might have been kind of gearing up for instinctively, not intentionally. Once we've taken a few minutes to do this and we feel more regulated, we want to observe the situation from this safe distance with our whole brain's participation. So this goes back to the mindfulness observe skill, where we observe only what we can perceive through our own senses. This means we know what we're thinking and feeling and what the other person said or did. We also know that we do not know what's going to happen next, what the other person is thinking or feeling, what they secretly want or mean by that thing they just said. We don't know any of that. So we want to take this opportunity to see what's really there and what we might have been adding or subtracting from the facts of reality, so that we can at least be curious about whether those additions or subtractions are going to help us reach our goal in this communication. And now we can proceed mindfully. Now we can recognize that we want to behave in a way that's going to be effective, not the way that our impulses in the orange or red zone wanted us to behave, to make a point or to assert some control or to get the last word. We can use our prefrontal cortexes to consider the path to the outcome that we're hoping for, which is sometimes really far off from what we would have just done without this kind of reflection. I know I have moments with my family where I might snap at somebody, feeling in the moment like I am totally justified in doing that and that it's the best or even the only way to get the outcome that I want. But this is rarely true. No one likes to be treated this way, and they rarely do what we want in the long term if this is our approach. Or maybe without reflection, I'll avoid saying something or bringing up a hard topic because I'm assuming I'll be judged or that it's going to turn into a difficult conversation. But if I use this skill, I might see that the topic is important enough to take that risk and even find some ways to reduce the risk. So we can use this skill to avoid doing or saying something that we later regret. We can use it to make sure that we say the things that we really want to say, that we communicate what's most important to us. And it also works to help us reduce our distress. A mom taking my adult DBT class right now just used this skill, and I wanted to share her example. Her son had just had dental surgery, and she's watching him not follow the aftercare recommendations. He was smoking, which you're not supposed to do. So he comes to her to say that he's worried that he has dry socket. And she said that what she wanted to do was say, well, what did you think was going to happen? You're doing exactly what you're not supposed to do. The doctor told you this. I told you this. Instead, she used the stop skill. She knew where that reaction would lead her because she's been down that path before. So she decided to use the stop skill. And so she just stopped. She didn't say anything. And while doing that, while not saying anything, appearing to listen, she took a step back by just taking some deep breaths, relaxing her muscles. Then she observed that she really wanted to stay connected to her son and let him learn his own lessons because she knew it was only going to cause conflict if she tried to drive it home. So she proceeded mindfully by just asking how she could help and being willing to call the dentist for him. And so they were able to stay connected and happy with each other because of her skillfulness. She said it definitely would have created a crisis if she had chosen door number one. Okay, more about communication skills. So once we've used the stop skill, we are ready to think about this great communication skill called the Dear Man. Surprise, it's another acronym. The first step of doing a Dear Man, though, before we even get to the acronym, is to take a moment to clarify our objectives between these three things. In every communication, whether you're calling the cable company, talking to your boss, navigating a difficulty with a friend or a family member, or just trying to request a ride or that somebody be home on time, all three of these factors are relevant. So, first, there's the goal. This is why you're approaching the person in the first place, the reason for the conversation. You want to make a request. You want to say no to a request. You want to clarify something. Maybe you want to have your feelings or perspective heard or understood. There's always a reason you're approaching the person in the first place. So you want to get really clear on what that is before you communicate. A lot of communications go haywire because we're unclear of our own intentions in the first place. Next, we have the objective for the relationship. How do I want the relationship to feel during and after this interaction? Do I hope the relationship is improved? Do I hope to just keep things cool between us? How do I want the other person to feel about me, about us, during or because of this interaction? And then we have also to consider our self respect objective. How do I want to feel about myself after this interaction? What might I want to do or avoid doing during this interaction so that I know that however things end up, because remember, when we're trying to communicate with another person, we can only take care of our own side of the street. So, however things end up, I want to know I did my best. I want to know that I used my skills to the best of my ability. So, we want to take a moment to consider what each of those objectives are for us before we go into a conversation. I'm going to go back to the shoes in the hallway example I used earlier to paint a picture for you all of what this skill might look like. So, if I'm going to approach my teen about the shoes in the hallway, I want to have a clear objective. Maybe my objective is to let them know why it's bothering me that the shoes are left there after so many reminders. Maybe my objective is to try to incentivize the desired behavior of putting the shoes away, like offering some kind of reward. Maybe my objective is to request their participating in troubleshooting the shoe problem with me. Depending on which of those objectives I go with, the conversations would all look really different. So it's super important that I'm clear. Also, notice that all of these objectives are things that I can do on my own without anybody else's participation or willingness. I cannot set an objective to change someone else's behavior because I don't have that power. I can only consider what behavior I want to execute in the hopes that it might lead to resolution, maybe through somebody else's changed behavior, but maybe by a different route. So let's say for our purposes here that I consider all the possible goals and discover that what I really want is to request that we try to find a solution together. That's going to be my goal objective. Next, I want to think about the relationship objective. In most situations, if I don't take care of the relationship at least a little bit by being respectful at the very least, I'm also not going to get my goal met, and I'm not likely to feel good about myself if I'm being disrespectful. So, self respect is also going to take a hit. So, like I said earlier, if I'm in the orange or red zone and snapping, it's highly unlikely that anyone's going to feel good about our relationship or want to do what I ask. So maybe in the short term, the behavior changes, but in the long term, the person might even actively try to be disruptive as payback. They certainly don't have any buy in to my needs. So I always want to take care of the relationship enough to have a good likelihood that I'll get my goal met and feel good about myself in the end. In a situation with my teenager, though, or with my parent or a friend, anyone I care for, I also really want the relationship to not be damaged by my approach to communication. And I would hope that in many cases, I'm communicating in a way that might even improve the relationship. So I'm going to try to reach my goal in such a way that the person wants to do the thing that I'm requesting and feels good about me and about us. So I want to keep in mind for my relationship objective that that's a high goal of mine, that I want things to be cool or even better through this interaction. Lastly, we want to consider our self respect objective. This is where we ask ourselves, how do I want to feel about myself after this conversation? How will I feel about myself if I become overly emotional? How will I feel if I use bribery or threats to get the outcome I want? How will I feel if I'm dishonest? I offer these examples because they are all things that most humans sometimes do when communicating with others, but we rarely think of them beforehand. We rarely consider the impact and likely outcome dependent upon these options. So, if I think about all of these things, I'm going to come to the conclusion in this example that I want to avoid using threats to get the outcome I want, and I want to be respectful and loving so that I feel good about myself during and after the conversation. So many of our communications in a family happen on the fly while other things are happening and we're emotionally dysregulated. But if we can find an opportunity to consider these three objectives before communicating, it will go better. And the more we take the time to do this about conversations that we can see coming and even plan for, the easier it's going to be to do it in a moment of chaos. Okay, so let's say that I decide that my goal is to request that my teenager make a plan for the shoes with me. My relationship objective is to behave in such a way that we stay connected and maybe even loving throughout. And my self respect objective is that I want to avoid being disrespectful to my kid. I want to treat them with respect, even if I feel frustrated. But wait, our work is not done because now we need to prioritize these three things. I need to decide what's most important, second, and third important. And the reason for this is because in many situations, a conversation is going to look and feel really different if the goal is the highest priority, self respect is second, and relationship is third, than if relationship and self respect are first and second, with getting the goal met being our lowest priority. All three are important, none gets left behind or left out. We just want to know the order or priority before acting. I have been guilty many times of thinking that my highest priority is getting the desired outcome, relationship and self respect be damned. I have learned for myself through these situations that in a family, in most cases, the relationship is the highest priority. At the end of the day, what's most important to us is that we stay connected and feeling good about our family members. Peace in a family brings so much more satisfaction in life than having the shoes placed exactly where we want them, or a ride to a friend's place every time we ask, or the car returned on time. This does not mean that we give up on those goals, just that we remember that our love for each other and family is usually our highest goal, and that we take a close look at our objectives and their order of priority every now and again. So for me, in this example, relationship comes first, then self respect, then the desired outcome. If this were a safety concern or something more critical, the goal may be higher. There's no right or wrong in prioritization, and it's going to be different for everyone and every situation. But for our purposes here, let's say that. Okay, now that we know what we hope to communicate and we have our priorities in order, um, next we're going to be able to go into the Dear Man. So, the DEAR part of this acronym can be thought of as a script that we prepare, and ideally, we write it out so that we're very clear. Each step, as you can see here, to describe, express, assert, and reinforce, it's just one or two sentences. The man part is what we're doing on the inside, behind the scenes, while we're presenting the DEAR part. So, the describe step is where you want to orient the person to the issue that you're approaching them about. And ideally, we want to start this conversation from a place of agreement. So it's helpful to only describe observable facts, like we learned when we talked about the observe skill in mindfulness, and again in the stop skill. So, for instance, I want to describe when I came home just now, your shoes were in the middle of the hallway again, and I almost tripped. I do not want to describe every time I come home, your shoes are inconsiderately placed where you know I'm going to trip on them, and it is so unreasonable that I have to bring this up to you again. Part of my brain is really wanting to say all of those things, but this will not be effective. I'm adding a lot to the facts that I can perceive through my senses if I say all that. So, when being skillful, we'll stick with when I got home just now, your shoes were in the middle of the hallway again. We can all agree that that's true. Next, we want to express. This is where we let the person know how the thing we've just described is impacting us, why it's important enough that we're bringing it up. We don't want to assume that the person knows what's going on in our minds, what we're thinking or feeling, just the same as we don't want to be assuming those things about them. So we want to be direct and clear to avoid miscommunications or misunderstandings as best as possible. So in this example, I might say, I'm worried I'm going to trip one of these days because I'm usually carrying a lot of things when I first get home. So we're making sure that we have a clear explanation so that the other person can understand what comes next, which is the assert. Assertiveness gets a bad rap sometimes. Sometimes it's confused for aggression, but it's not that. The definition of assertive is having or showing a confident or forceful personality. Synonyms include decisive, emphatic, self assured. These are not bad things. And in communication, it helps everyone involved if the thing that is being requested or expressed is being requested or expressed confidently, decisively, and emphatically, because those things add up to a lot of clarity. So when we assert here, we're not beating around the bush. We're not hinting at what we want or assuming that the person should already know what we want. We're also not demanding or bullying someone into doing what we want. We're being clear and direct. In our example, I want to clearly and directly ask my teen, can we work together to figure out how to prevent me from tripping upon arriving at home? There's no question about what I'm wanting to do. I want to have a conversation with them and come up with a solution to my problem. I want their help and their buy-in. It can also be helpful to frame the request as a question because then we get feedback immediately about whether or not the person agrees to doing what we're asserting. And then finally, we reinforce. This is where we let the other person know what's in it for them. We want to be willing to give to get. At the very least, we can show appreciation. Thank you so much for being willing to work on this with me. In our families, especially where the relationship is a high priority, we might want to use humor to put everybody at ease as part of our reinforce. I don't want you to have to drive me to the ER before you even get your license. Carrots work better than sticks here. So if you can, go for reinforcing behavior with a positive outcome for them instead of a negative, like a punishment. So this is your script. When I got home just now, Hang on, I think I have a slide. Yeah. When I got home just now, your shoes were in the hallway and I almost tripped. I'm worried I'm going to trip one of these days with my arms full walking in the door. Can we work together to figure out how to prevent me from tripping? Thanks, honey. I'd hate for you to have to drive with your permit. If your first drive with your permit was to take me to the ER. So while I'm saying this script and during the conversation that follows, I'm going to be doing the man part. This means I am staying mindful. So, this is not only about staying present in the moment as it is, it also means we're not going to be distracted by other things. If the person you're talking to brings something else up that's irrelevant to the conversation, we want to either ignore that or ask to come back to it by saying something validating like, oh, that is important. Let's figure out the shoe thing, and then you'll have my full attention to deal with that. Even if the person says something mean or has an attitude or isn't excited to have this conversation because they're stuck in limbic activation and they're unable to consider the long term consequences of their actions, we don't want to choose this time to follow up on that. There might be a separate Dear Man about this that you're going to prepare later, but for right now, you're either finding a solution to the shoe problem or you're giving space so everyone can get their parasympathetic nervous system and prefrontal cortex back online. Sometimes we might use a strategy called broken record to stay mindful, where we just keep restating our script or parts of our script until the person kind of comes to terms with the fact that they need to address our Dear Man with us before we move on. Next, we want to appear confident. Note that this does not require that we actually be or feel confident, simply that we appear confident. Assertive communication can be stressful. Even when we know that we have our skills prepared, we can never know whether the other person is able to be skillful for sure. So it's normal to not necessarily feel confident. Although definitely preparing your script is helpful in this department. Being really clear about what you want to say and how best to say it can definitely help our confidence. But no matter how we feel, we want to appear confident. This means making solid eye contact, using a normal speaking voice, not an apologetic or worried or scared tone, having a relaxed body and facial expression. Appearing confident helps both the giver and the receiver of a Dear Man. When we're intentionally doing things to appear confident, our brains get the message that those things are happening and the parasympathetic nervous system gets engaged because everything must be okay if I'm acting like everything's okay. It also puts the other person at ease. If I'm relaxing while we're talking, then you can relax too. You're not in trouble. I'm not about to tell you something or tell you to do something unreasonable. We're just talking something through. Everything's fine. Finally, we want to be willing to negotiate. So if my plan is that my teen put their shoes in the closet when they get home, and they're really resistant to that because they're also carrying stuff and they're tired and it's just too much, I want to be willing to negotiate. So I might say, okay, how about if you just remember to kick them off to the side so they're not right where I have to step when I enter? And my teen might say, well, that's what I was supposed to be doing already and it's not working. So we'll think on it. And then one of us, maybe even my kid, will come up with a solution. We'll say, okay, what if we put a shoe tray or something, like a box to the side of the door? And then I'll see that when I walk in and I'll remember that that's where shoes go. Now we might have hit on an actual solution. We've come to it together. It's not my way or the highway, and it's much more likely to be something that works in the long run. So those are your Dear Man skills. Okay. I want to point you in the direction of these resources for DBT. So the first book here is just a really good one for parents of kids, really of all ages, who just have big emotions that we're trying to use DBT skills to help address, both for parents and for kids. The green book, the second two are some really popular books of worksheets. So the green one is for all ages, and the other one is intended for teens. And Brainstorm is the book that I mentioned at the beginning when discussing neurology and brain development. And this one is specifically about the adolescent brain. Having facts like this to observe, being able to observe, like science says that my teen's brain is working like this, can really help us use our DBT skills with teens and as teens. And finally, at the bottom here, this is an app that a lot of people love. It has worksheets and ways to track emotions and skill use, and it can just be a really good guide if you want to dig more into these skills. Okay, so we did it. We covered the 4 skills of mindfulness, tip, stop, and dear man. I hope that they feel helpful and relevant. In DBT, the way that we learn skills is first by talking about them, like this, and then by practicing them in real life, usually on easy things first, so that we get familiar with them and feel like we can use them in more challenging situations as well. When we practice them, we use worksheets to remind ourselves of all the steps, because as you saw, there are usually a number of steps. And it's ideal to really write down how we did them and how they worked. There are tons of worksheets available online. If you just do, an image search of DBT mindfulness or tip, stop, or dear man, you can pick the best one for you out of lots and lots of different options. Okay, so I'm going to turn my camera on, and I'd love to see some of you as well if you're comfortable with that. And we can just have some questions. Let me find myself to turn my camera on.
Kristen, did you see the 2 questions that were already put in the chat?
Oh, I see them now.
Okay, I can read them too.
First, I'm so not technologically savvy. I'm trying to find myself in the meeting to turn my camera back on. Oh, there it is. Okay. Hi. Okay, so let me look at these questions. Hmm. Okay. Oh, I'm really sorry that it was hard to hear me. I think so. Okay, Julie got that one. Okay. Yes, so splashing your face with cold tap water does work. I personally would not say that it works, as well. If it's what you have, then use it. Use whatever you can get your hands on. But if you can do kind of a fuller experience of that tip skill, I would highly recommend that you at least give it a shot, because it just works so effectively. So the more of that kind of sensory information that you can give yourself, the better for that. And I just lost the chat. Adam, can you tell me what the other questions were?
Yeah, that was the first one, and the other one was, it says, "These strategies seem to be geared towards when the interactions are explosive or difficult, but what would your advice be when your teen just avoids talking to you almost entirely?"
Yeah. So when that is going on, I would say this. I would still use the dear man skill personally. So the way that I would approach that is to, make sure that I'm regulated before going into that conversation, because obviously that's a really tough situation to be in. And then I would want to, for the describe, I might say it's really hard for us to find a way to talk lately, right? Whatever you think that your teen might agree on, being the describe, like what's something that, isn't going to immediately start a disagreement. Um, and then express, I'm really missing you, or I feel disconnected from you, or we have some things that we really need to discuss. Um, and then assert, how can we have a conversation? Right. So I'm really requesting from my kid that they give me information about how we can make this happen. And then reinforce that, like, I think that we can get you into that class that you wanted to get into if we can talk about the things that will get in the way and we can kind of troubleshoot that together. Or I think that things might feel better if we could talk at least every now and then. So, whatever you think might appeal to the teen, um, to kind of offer them that information as a reinforce. And then hopefully, if it can be, I mean, timing is key with so many of these things, which is why that staying mindful bit can be helpful. So if you find like there's no space for having a conversation in this moment, then you can absolutely, kind of pull back and then try it again a different time. Because maybe they'll be ready to talk later, but not right now. Usually it's at like 1 in the morning that they're like, it's talking time. Um, and so looking for whatever windows of willingness we can get and then plugging the skills into those moments and being willing to negotiate, right? That step might be that they're like, we can't, I don't want to talk to you. I feel uncomfortable, but I can text. Um, and so being willing to see like whatever we can do, we'll do it. Does that answer your question?
Oh, I think so, someone else asked if you could share the SUDS slide again.
Hmm.
And then someone else is asking if we could turn off the slide so they can see you better. So,
Yeah, so it's hard to do both, but let me
yeah.
offer this. You can look at the slides in the background, or if you want to see the people better, you can click and drag on like the lower left-hand corner of the box that you see me in, and you can make it as big as the screen. Could that work? No, sorry, Debbie.
So there's some more questions when you're ready.
Great, I'm ready. Yeah.
Okay. So is the app you shared something for just parents, or would this also be something a teen could use?
Absolutely something that a teen could use as well. Yeah. Um, I think so. There are also a million apps. That's one that I have gotten like good reviews from many clients and DBT skills participants over the years, and that I like as well. There might be some for teens that feel, I mean, I don't know. You know how it is when you use any kind of app for learning or tracking where it's like so personal what the style is. So definitely give it a try, but just know that there are more resources if that one doesn't feel like a good fit for your teen.
And someone is asking if you take insurance.
So I take insurance in my individual work. I don't take insurance in my DBT skills training or family DBT boot camps, partly because the way that DBT as like formal DBT has to be run is that there needs to be a supervision team and you need to leave your therapist and work with the DBT therapist. So my program is more flexible, and that also means that I can't take insurance. But I am willing to talk to people about sliding scale or what works for different families.
And anyone that wants to can turn their screen on and ask a question in person. Jackie is saying this has been very helpful. Thank you.
I'm good. I would love more questions because I know that I just gave you a lot of skills, but also that it's a lot of information. So if there's anything that people have in mind, I would love to have a longer talk about it.
What if someone's asking, what if you can't say, I need a break?
Yeah. So I guess first I would say I hope you can. I hope that I know that there are situations where we truly can't. And in any situation where it's possible, I think that it's really important for parents to be able to say, I need a break. Um, if you can't say I need a break in the moment, you could try what, the mom that I was talking about did, where she did not step away from her son who had just had the dental work and was afraid that his smoking had caused a problem. She didn't step away. She stayed and she appeared as if she were listening. But really, she was taking deep breaths. She was relaxing her body. She was then really able to observe, I don't want this to turn into a crisis. And I know how to make it turn into a crisis. So let me think about how I can proceed mindfully and avoid a crisis. So if it's truly not possible to step away, then you want to, regulate yourself as much as possible so that you can stay, intentional and effective with your teen. And then maybe you can step away a little bit later, right? If you're feeling really dysregulated from the conversation. And also, you can say to your teen, like, I was surprised how well this worked in my family. And it's also worked great for a lot of people that I work with who maybe didn't anticipate that it would. Just saying, I want so badly to help with this. I want so badly to think this through with you. I hear what you're saying. I know that you're really angry right now, or whatever the emotion is that's going on. I assume it's a big emotion that's making it not feel possible to step away, or not possible to step away. If we can identify that and then say, and for me to help, or for me to, figure this out with you, or see how I could do something differently, if that's what you're asking, I just need 10 minutes to go and calm down. Um, I even tell my 5-year-old, or he's 6 now, I need to go meditate and you need to go to your room. And then he goes and meditates too, and it's helpful.
I just, that was me who was asking, and I find it's rare with my kids, more often with my husband, that I, I automatically do the stop and like try to take stock of things before saying anything that'll just make things worse.
Mhm.
But sometimes in the past, one of my sons has, and typically my husband will be like, after me, like, you can't take a break. You have to respond to me now. And I'm just like,
Yeah, that makes so much, it makes everything so much harder. It's very hard to be skillful in that type of situation. Um, so, one thing that I might say is when things are not stressful, doing a dear man about that, and communicating that, like, I am not any good to you when I'm that dysregulated. And it just pushes me up the SUD scale when that happens. The other thing that can be helpful, that it seems so obvious now that I like know this as a technique, tell people how long you're going to be gone for.
but I usually get to that point where I'm like, I can't speak.
Yeah.
And it's that I've done the dear man thing about it, and the feedback I get is, well, I need you to tell me that you need a break. You can't just storm off.
Right. Okay. So in that case, when we get to the point where we can't speak, and I understand that too, I wonder if there's like almost a safe word, right? That can be like banana. Like, I can't say the thing right now because it would require so much emotional energy, and my prefrontal cortex is shut down and I'm fully in that limbic activation zone. When that happens, that makes sense that you can't even think of the words that are going to get the job done. And so, sometimes like they give kids in school little like stickers that say like, I need a break, when they're dysregulated and learning how to regulate to use their words. Maybe you need a sticker,
I need
right?
that. Some little flag or something.
A
Thank
little,
you. Safe
yeah.
word is a good one. Thank you.
So there's some more questions, but one person is asking, what was the app? They missed that part where you talked about the app.
Yeah, so it just says DBT. It's like you need to know the picture to know the one. I unfortunately couldn't. Oop, that was it. Um, this one at the bottom of the screen here. So it's just called DBT, and then it has an image of a tree that is a brain.
And someone else is asking if after this, you could share the slide about the parasympathetic nervous system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then there's 2 other questions.
Okay. Yeah, so these 2 parts of the nervous system. And when I was looking for a good image for this, it was really hard to find something that was clear about like how it feels. But if you look up, parasympathetic nervous system or 2 parts of the nervous system, you'll get all kinds of, images or information about how they like do different things to our organs. And like they just change everything about how our bodies are functioning. And so again, it's like it's a circular system. So if I can change what my nervous system is doing by using those tip skills, I can change how I'm thinking and feeling. If I can change how I'm thinking, I may also be able to change how I'm feeling and then change what's going on in my nervous system. So we can come at it from both directions, but we're really trying to create physiological change.
Someone is asking, how do you get through Dear Man if your child has a limited attention span and ability to focus on the conversation?
So fast. You make those sentences so fast. I can be very long-winded, and it really takes me a lot of sitting and thinking about a dear man, um, to narrow down and really like winnow away at the things that I was wanting to say or feeling like saying to get to just the kernel that needs to be communicated. There are also definitely situations where we might take the describe or the express out. Like maybe it's something kind of mundane or that you've already talked about and you're pretty sure your kid knows. Like, if you were practicing this skill on something silly like asking somebody to get orange juice at the store, you wouldn't need to say, "We're out of orange juice." That's the describe. "I'm wanting some." That would be the express, right? You could leave those off and you could just get to the assert and the reinforce. So, you know, there's a lot of good stuff in the describe and the express. We find out quickly from our teens if they disagree already with the Dear Man as we begin it. If we do a describe and they're like, no, 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 the shoes weren't there, or that's not how it went. I want to have that information so that then I can take a step back and be like, oh, I could have sworn that I saw your shoes. Let's reevaluate what's your memory, right? Like we want to start that on the same page. And doing the describe really helps us to do that. But if there's situations where it feels like you can skip those bits, skip them. But otherwise, the describe could be 3 words, the express could be 4, and then you're on to the assert and the reinforce.
I have a question. Do you find that DBT has been successful with, like, say, teens who really do not like talking about their feelings to the point of they'll just say, whatever they think the person wants to hear to, have the session over? My daughter really struggles with sharing any kind of hard feelings or things that are triggering for her. So I was just wondering if you found that it's been successful with teens like that.
Yes. So I have 2 things to say about that. So one is that DBT does not require that we talk a lot about how we're feeling or, recounting things that happened that were upsetting or things like that, because it's so focused on learning skills that if the person even just wants to give us a very broad anything, we can work from that. And it's also very like ideally it's self-directed. It's not like other people are unhappy with how you're behaving. It's more that like, is this effective for you, or would you like something to be different, and then going from there. So I've worked with a lot of teens who present how you're describing, who have found it helpful and been able to at least learn some skills, even if they never like open up enormously to me.
Yeah.
Other really cool thing that I see over and over again with the family boot camps that I run. So that program is just like one family at a time. We do an intake. I find out exactly what it is that's going on from whoever's going to participate. And then I create a curriculum specifically to like those needs. So it could be 5 classes, it could be 10 classes, depending on how many skills people want, to learn and things along those lines. And one thing that I find over and over again is that teens who start the program and they're like, this is so stupid. I don't want to be here. That, it's a Tuesday night. It's 2 hours with my parents, right? Like completely understandable that this is the way that this feels and expected. What I find though is that even if the teens are participating very little on like the surface, by the end of the program, however we've kind of created it together, by the end of the program, the teen is saying things in the classes that are revealing that they are using DBT skills. They don't always know. Right? And I'm kind of to the parents like, don't acknowledge that this is happening, but like we both just heard that, right? Like we all are on the same page that this is it's getting in. They're taking what makes sense for them, what feels accessible, and they're using it. Um, and so yeah, I really have found that it's worked wonders for teens.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. I also want to say, I should have said it at the question about insurance. ServiceNet has one of the oldest DBT programs in the country. It's a really, really great program. It's there who trained me. They're just amazing over there. And they have an adolescent DBT program, and it's covered by most, if not all, insurances. Um, and so that's something that you could look into too, for sure.
We still have about 15 minutes if anyone has any other questions that you want to ask yourself or send through the chat.
And if there aren't any more questions, if people wanted to stay on and do a breathing exercise, we could do that 4-7-8 breath together, if that would be fun.
Oh, okay, here's another one. This is a whole can of worms. But what about when a kid freaks out when I take away their phone or threaten to take away their phone?
Mm-hmm. What an enormous can of worms. Yep. So, step one with any can of worms is to regulate yourself, right? So, your kid is hopelessly dysregulated immediately. Um, and so, step one, how am I going to regulate myself? Maybe before I approach them about the fact that they just lost this privilege, or during or after. So, having some tools and ideas on board that you're going to be using to kind of get yourself through that conversation because it's going to be a tough one. Um, Using the dear man to communicate that information can be really helpful, and including that if that is a really troubling um, consequence for your kid, is there any negotiation? Like if they really, 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 really do not want to lose their phone, can they negotiate for some different behavior on their part? Although again, their brains are not fully developed or connected. And so sometimes it really feels way outside their control. Um, but is there, some leverage that you can gain from like, well, I'm willing to negotiate on this. Let's have a conversation about what should happen instead. If you don't want to lose your phone, for doing this thing, how can you either not do this thing or what would be a different consequence? Kids are not great at identifying consequences that feel meaningful enough. And nothing is as intense, I would say, as losing your phone, because that's your connection to everything. And we're all so addicted to our phones. But maybe there's a way that it could be leveraged a little bit so that they can think of some different strategies so that they aren't doing the thing that is causing them to lose their phone. Tell me if that didn't address all of the can of worms, or if there's other parts that would be helpful to zoom in on.
She said that's very helpful. Thank you.
The other thing I'll say about that is that a lot of times as parents, I feel like the best we can do is regulate ourselves, right? And that it can be helpful to remember, like, I can't control what's going on with my kid right now necessarily. They're having their own big feelings. This is what their path is looking like right now. If I can stay regulated, I will tolerate this better. And I also will be more of an ally to them when I can have some kind of impact on what they're experiencing or what's going on for them. So I think that, and I know every one of you knows this, but like, us parents forget to take care of ourselves to take care of our kids. Um, but we're just so much better at taking care of our kids when we can be regulated in these ways.
Well, I guess if there aren't any more questions, I think a breathing exercise would be nice to finish.
Excellent. Okay. So I would love to just kind of count us through the 4-7-8 breath. So what I usually do is I'll count 2 rounds, 2 cycles of that breath, and then you can count for yourself. And I'll just kind of keep an eye on the time, and we'll just do like 3 minutes. So nothing huge. Um, so first, get comfortable wherever you're at. So, be in a position anytime you want to do like a breathing exercise or a mindfulness, a position where you don't have to like work hard to keep your body comfortable or hold yourself up. So get into a comfortable position and either close your eyes or relax your eyes somewhere in front of you that's not going to be distracting. And then just to start, take a few deep breaths and notice where you're at on that scale of distress. So notice, are you feeling around a 50 where there's some activation, but pretty much chill, manageable? Is it above that? If so, try to notice, like, grab yourself a number where you're at on that scale. And then breathe out all the way. And then inhale for 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Keep counting. You can stop the count on your next exhale and just notice before you open your eyes or turn your camera back on where you're at on that scale now. Does anyone have thoughts or questions about that or want to share how it was?
Someone else said thank you.
That's one I use a lot for myself. Just I do a lot of yoga and so I think that's where I was first introduced to it, but I find that one really effective in a lot of situations too, although I feel like I don't often use it in interactions with my son, but I think I'm gonna start in the right, right situation where
Yeah.
there's time for it.
Absolutely. And we can do it while driving in the car with somebody in the back seat being cranky, right? Like you don't have, it doesn't have to take time out of, obviously it's nice to just sit and breathe. Um, but ideally we can do that one secretly if we need to regulate ourselves in a moment where we maybe can't say, I need space or, yeah.
Thank you. This was really helpful.
I'm so glad.
Well, I'd like to thank Kristen again for doing this. And just to remind people, this has been recorded, so you can go back to our website and review it and see the slides again.
Great. Thanks everybody for being here.